Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, aid agencies are warning deaths in the Mediterranean will increase after they suspended migrant rescue missions in response to what they said were threats from the Libyan government. Save the Children, Médecins Sans Frontières, and the German charity CI pulled their ships back after Libya announced it was expanding its zone of control off the coast and warned the charities to stay away. Meanwhile, a ship run by anti-immigrant activists, which is shadowing charity boats in the Med, is back up and running after technical difficulties. Porrick O'Brien has the latest.
Rescue blankets, we need rescue blankets.
Rescue blankets.
There's always been a fraught relationship between the charity rescue boats operating off the Libyan coast and the Libyan Coast Guard. As we discovered one night last month on the German charity rescue boat Sea-Watch 2. The security camera picked up the Libyan Coast Guard approach the ship, weapons at the ready, prompting the captain of the charity vessel to ask the Italian Navy for help.
We have been ordered to stop.
Sea-Watch who gave you the order to stop it?
A man with a weapon.
NGOs do periodically enter Libyan territorial waters, and when they do, the Coast Guard treat it as an affront to sovereignty. Just last week, they fired warning shots to deter a Spanish rescue vessel in the Mediterranean. The EU's policy is to enable the Libyans to turn back migrant boats and stem the flow, and in the last 2 weeks at least, that appears to be working. The Libyans, and the Italians to an extent, see the NGOs as part of a problem, creating what they see as a pull factor. Now the UN-backed administration in Tripoli has flexed its muscles in a much more profound way. The Libyan Navy announced an extended Libyan-controlled search and rescue zone a few days ago. At the moment, an official body in Rome oversees charity rescues in a designated area. It would appear on the face of it that the administration in Tripoli is notionally at least taking over the coordination of a new extended search and rescue zone. Starting at the Libyan coast but extending far beyond received territorial waters of 12 miles out to a much larger 97-mile zone. In other words, and it's still not clear, NGOs would have to get express permission from Tripoli to operate inside this area. The immediate upshot of this, a number of charities, including Save the Children, have temporarily stopped their rescue missions.
I think what concerns Save the Children more than anything is the possibility of an increase in mortality rates of people who would still be making this perilous journey. And given that rescues never happen at 50 miles or 60 miles, we are once again facing the Mediterranean being the largest unmarked grave in recent times.
Into this fraught mix, the alt-right activists of Defend Europe on board the crowd-funded Sea Star, trying to highlight what they describe as the NGO's ferry service for migrants. The publicity stunt with its latest PR misfire over the weekend. After technical difficulties and a distress call, a charity rescue boat offered assistance, help that was turned down. The Sea Star is operational again, and as we speak is playing a game of cat and mouse with the Aquarius, a rescue ship operated by a German charity. This is a time-lapse of the Sea Star following the Aquarius in the Mediterranean over the last 24 hours. The thing is, of course, what's happening off the Libyan coast is not a game, either of the PR or political variety.
Porrick O'Brien. Well, I'm joined now by George Graham, the Director for Humanitarian Policy for Save the Children UK. Thanks for coming into the studio, George. How many children will die, suffer as a result of this? We don't really know, but it's going to be terrible for them.
Yeah, we don't know the numbers, but But boats like ours have saved hundreds, in fact thousands of lives this year and last year, and we're not alone. There are other boats, not just charity boats, I should emphasise. There are all sorts of ships in the Mediterranean who, in accordance with international maritime law, rescue ships in distress. That's what people do when they're at sea. So the risks to people, and I work for Save the Children, so I'm particularly focused on the children, are very high indeed.
I mean, unwittingly, many of the charities and their rescue boats have become part of the people smugglers' business model. But people smugglers know that if they dump people in the sea, they will be picked up by the charities. If the charities now have to stay further away from the Libyan coast, does that mean that fewer migrants will try and get to Europe?
That's an accusation, or a hypothesis, rather, that has been put a few times, but it's actually been tested. A report by Oxford University showed that when the search and rescue capacity reduced 1 year ago, there wasn't a commensurate reduction in the number of people seeking to make the crossing. So we argue that the search and rescue mission is not a pull factor. There's no evidence to suggest that it is a pull factor. You could hypothesise that it's a pull factor, but the only way you could test that is by letting people drown. And so we're making a fairly straightforward humanitarian argument, which is that people are losing their lives, children are losing their lives. Let's not let that happen.
And if more people drown now in this 97-mile exclusion zone, we might never know about it.
Oh, we wouldn't know. I mean, we have numbers of people who have been recorded to have drowned. So last year, some 4,500 were reported to have drowned. But we don't know about potentially many more who never even were reported on.
The key to so much of this is the kind of chaos within Libya. What can we do? What can Europe do? What can you do in order to alleviate the situation?
You're right to point to the chaos in Libya. The testimonies that we hear from the people who we've been rescuing are awful, talking about sexual abuse, torture, detention, children being forced into labour or into armed groups. It's a really nasty situation. Save the Children and other organisations are trying to operate in Libya. It's obviously a very tough environment. We're trying to do our best to address the problem everywhere. So not just in the Mediterranean, but in Libya and indeed in other countries where people are coming from in the first place.
And very briefly, finally, Spain is now a big crossing point as well, isn't it? Bigger than Libya. No, sorry, Morocco to Spain. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true that the routes that people take change. And one of the truths about the whole migration business, if you like, is that if you try to make it impossibly dangerous in one location, people will just try somewhere else, and that will be even more dangerous, which is why safe and legal routes to allow people, if they're going to claim asylum, to do so, if they're not going to get economic status, to be to be processed properly, are so important.
George Graham, thanks very much.